He stood at attention in a muddy trench, surrounded by the sounds of war. He is small in stature, standing at only 5'4" and weighing 130 pounds. But he is a valiant soldier with a big heart and immense courage. His name is Private Henry Johnson. He's from Albany, New York. But tonight, he found himself in the Argonne Forest, in France, during World War I. Private Henry Johnson and fellow soldier Needham Roberts were on sentry duty shortly after midnight on May 14, 1918. The African-American soldiers stood watch near a bridge over the Inn River. The two young men were members of the all-black 369th Infantry Regiment, an all-African-American unit that served during World War I. Also known as the Harlem Hellfighters, these soldiers were part of the New York National Guard and were some of the first African-American soldiers to serve in the United States Army. And although the U.S. Army accepted black soldiers due to pressure from black political leaders, they were not fully integrated to fight with the white soldiers of the U.S. Army due to discrimination and segregation. U.S. military's all-white leadership questioned whether black soldiers had the intelligence or courage to fight. So most were relegated to support roles and labor duties. Instead of assigning them to combat duty, instead, they were donated to the French. American Expeditionary Forces detached the all-black regiment to bolster their understaffed French ally, but more importantly, the U.S. Army wanted to preserve its racial segregation. However, the French were less concerned about racial inequality and simply welcomed the extra help. As for the black soldiers, they were relieved to be free of ditch digging and were eager to join the front lines. Now under the command of the French Fourth Army, the 369th Infantry arrived on the front line trenches in the Champagne region of France. Private Johnson, like the rest of his infantry, was ready to show the world that he was capable, and eager to prove to America that he was just as brave and determined as any of the white soldiers. But tonight, so far, was a quiet night. But Johnson was keenly aware that danger could strike at any moment. Suddenly, Johnson would hear the sound of footsteps approaching, and as he continued to hear the strange noises late into the night, he urged his buddy Roberts to wake up. A tired Roberts waved him off, believing Johnson was just paranoid and nervous. Following his instincts, Johnson began to reach for his rifle and prepare himself for an attack, piling up an assortment of grenades and bullet cartridges within arm's reach. If someone was coming, he would be ready. Johnson crouches down, trying to blend into the darkness. He can feel his heart racing as he waits to see if it's the enemy who will emerge. The rustling is getting louder and closer. Then the rustling stops, and the silence is broken by the sound of a clipping noise. What Johnson suspects to be the sound of the perimeter fence being cut. He tugged on Roberts again to wake up. You better wake up, or you may not have the chance to wake up ever again. Roberts is now fully awake, and the two began lobbing grenades into the darkness, hoping to discourage whoever might be lurking around the perimeter. Suddenly, in the middle of the French forest, Johnson saw a group of 20 German soldiers emerge from the darkness. They were charging, bayonets pointed toward them. With a deep breath, Johnson exclaims, "We're not gonna die tonight. I've got to be brave for my family and for my country." They began to fire. Johnson would fire 3 rounds from his French-made rifle, which brought a volley of return gunfire from the German snipers. The two soldiers were suddenly surrounded by dozens of German soldiers. Heavily outgunned and outnumbered 20-2, they both refused to give up without a fight. After expending all of their ammunition, Johnson and Roberts tossed all the remaining of their hand grenades. As the battle raged on, Johnson shouted for Roberts to run back and alert the main line of defense. But at that moment, the first enemy grenades landed in their position, and Roberts was struck down. Roberts was now rendered immobile, suffering from severe shrapnel wounds to his arm and his hip. Johnson knew now that he must act courageously if he hopes to make it out alive. Now all out of grenades, he then grabbed his Army-issue bolo knife. Despite his small size, he proved to be a formidable opponent with the knife, using his quick reflexes and sharp mind to outmaneuver and stab one German soldier after another. As Johnson looked back to check on his buddy Roberts, he saw two Germans lifting him up to carry him off towards the German lines. Johnson then grabs his rifle and charges out of the trench and into the fray. Johnson swung his rifle like a club and kept them at bay until the stock of his rifle splintered. Turning to face the rest of the German patrol, Johnson was struck by a bullet from an automatic pistol, but continued to lunge forward, stabbing and slashing at the enemy. As he engages in hand-to-hand combat, Johnson displays an incredible amount of valor and bravery, never once backing down in the face of danger. Overwhelmed by Johnson's ferocity and intimidated by the sound of French and American troops approaching, the Germans panicked. The enemy patrol retreated back into the night. By the morning daylight, the carnage was clear. Even after suffering 21 wounds in his hand-to-hand combat with 20 German soldiers, Henry Johnson was given the name Black Death for having stopped the Germans from approaching the French line or even capturing his fellow soldier. The question of whether the African-American soldier could fight and show just as much loyalty as any other unit was answered in the darkness of May 15, 1918. The French 16th Division, which commanded the Harlem Hellfighters, quickly recognized the actions of Private Johnson and Roberts. The two soldiers received the French Croix de Guerre, that country's highest military honor. They were the first U.S. soldiers to earn this distinction, and Henry Johnson's medal included the coveted Gold Palm for extraordinary valor. The all-black 369th Infantry Regiment continued to serve with distinction in World War I through the rest of the war, participating in several major battles and earning a reputation as one of the most effective fighting units of the war. Despite facing discrimination, these determined soldiers proved their bravery, and the unit also received the Croix de Guerre for its actions, alongside 171 individual decorations for heroism. After the war, Johnson and Roberts returned home to America as national heroes. Promoted to sergeant, Henry Johnson led the New York City parade for the 369th in February 1919. However, when the war ended, so did the accolades. The modern Purple Heart was not created until 1932, so Johnson did not receive that recognition for his injuries. He wasn't even given a pension, but Johnson was black. And at that time, black soldiers were accustomed to being overlooked by the country that they'd risked their life for. Johnson would return to his job as a train station porter and struggled to eke out a living the best he could. By the time he died just shy of his 37th birthday, he was destitute and estranged from his family. Few knew his name or what he had done, and no one was telling his story. Henry H. Johnson transitioned 1929 and is currently buried at the Arlington National Cemetery. Some 97 years after his heroic combat service in France in 1918, the Department of Defense reviewed his records in 2015 and recommended his Medal of Honor, presented by then-President Barack Obama. Let's take a moment to salute the Harlem Hellfighters, the most celebrated U.S. regiment of African-American soldiers during World War I.